How is it possible that the most fortunate and celebrated people in the world can be totally depressed, while the most unfortunate people can be happy? That's what we're going to talk about right now. Imagine that you went to like a dinner for like a AA, Alcoholics Anonymous type meeting, a focus group for the depressed, where they get up and tell their problems, uh, why they're suffering. Imagine you get this is for depressed people. You get up, you're sitting there having dinner, and one by one the guests get up there. But these are famous people, celebrated people. You see Abraham Lincoln speak, Theodore Roosevelt, Robert Schumann, the great conductor and musician, Ludwig von Beethoven, one of the most celebrated musician in history, is getting up there telling about his almost suicidal depression. Edgar Allan Poe, the most famous Gothic writer ever. Mark Twain, the most famous person of his time, uh, one of the greatest American writers. And Vincent van Gogh, the most his paintings sell for more than any other writer in history, and he's probably the most famous artist who ever lived. But he was a miserable. He tells about his utter misery and how he never sold a painting in his whole life while he was alive, maybe one, and that was for pennies. And these were extremely depressed people. Listen to what Reagan says. I'm sorry, not Reagan, Lincoln. Listen to what Lincoln said. Imagine Lincoln is standing up there addressing the group of depressed people, and he says, "I am now the most miserable living man. If what I feel were equally distributed to the whole human family, his feelings, if it were distributed across the entire of humanity, there would be not one cheerful face on the entire earth. Whether I shall ever be better, I cannot tell. I awfully forebode I shall not. To remain as I am is impossible. I must die or be better, it appears to me." Now, he encourages people to persevere, because another day brings hope and things change. He says years later he wrote another letter. It said that year that was drawing toward the close has been filled with blessings of fruitful fields and healthful skies. These bounties are so constantly enjoyed that we are prone to forget the source from which they come. So years later, Lincoln was happy. But these are some of the most celebrated people of their time, people whose accomplishments are, amazing. They speak for themselves. But how could we would think such people would be possible, and yet happy, and yet they were depressed. Now you take people who have some. These are lowly people who have an excuse to be depressed, but they're happy. How could that be? Well, let's take a look. One of them, her name was Fanny Crosby. Now, imagine as a little girl, she's not a special girl. I mean, she is, but she's not a famous person. She's just a regular girl, and she goes to the doctor, and a medical mistake is made, and she's blind for life. She's blinded for life as a child because of a medical mistake. Now, that's something, most people probably would get a little down about that, especially just about anybody, really. Uh, However, Fanny turned to the church, and throughout her life she was a Methodist Episcopal. She attended church, but when she was in her 40s, she began to write gospel lyrics. In this book I'm reading here, it says she began in her early 40s to write gospel song lyrics as earnest as she became the happiest creature in all the land. So she starts writing gospel music, and it says she became the happiest creature in all the land. This is a blind woman who was blinded by somebody's mistake and is going through life blind. And, I mean, if she wanted to be a whiner and have an excuse to complain, she certainly would have something to point to. But no, she didn't. She didn't do that. She focused on writing gospel music and praising the Lord and all these beautiful songs that were sung in churches. And she was one of the greatest gospel writers of all time, the greatest hymn writers of all time. Another example. Another example is, imagine you want to know somebody who had reason to be depressed. How about a saint, first of all, these are generally impoverished people, but then you get taken by the powerful people and thrown in a dungeon to die along with miserable, dying, starving, tortured people. Now that's depressing. But here's what a martyr saint once wrote just before his death in such a situation. He wrote, "In a dark hole I have found cheerfulness. In a place of bitterness and death I have found rest. While others weep, I have found laughter. Where others fear, I have found strength. Who would believe that in a state of misery I have had great pleasure, that in a lonely corner I have had glorious company, and in the hardest bonds perfect repose? All these things Jesus has granted me. He is with me, comforts me, and fills me with joy. He drives bitterness from me and fills me with strength and consolation." So we may be shackled by circumstances or harsh situation in life, but as this martyr saint shows us, we have a way out. Jesus can fill us with strength and consolation. So even in a dungeon when people are being tortured and dying all around us, we can say with this martyr saint, "In the hardest bonds, perfect repose. He fills me with joy, drives bitterness, and fills me with strength and consolation." If that's true, then nothing in life can overcome our happiness. We have a source of happiness that no amount of suffering can overcome. Thanks for watching. Fight on.